Look closely at this frame. A 6-year-old girl in a faded hoodie standing inches away from the most feared man in New York. In any other story, this is a tragedy. The bodyguards are reaching for their holsters, the restaurant has gone silent, and a child is pointing at a Mafia boss's tattoo, claiming it belongs to her grandmother. But look at Nikiko Valente's face. He isn't reaching for a weapon, he's looking at a ghost. Why does a cold-blooded killer suddenly look like he's seen a miracle? Today we're dissecting the debt of blood, a psychological breakdown of how a single act of mercy from 18 years ago just became the only thing keeping this child alive in a city that wants to swallow her whole.
On a stagnant Tuesday at Rosario's, a 6-year-old embodiment of innocence approaches the city's most formidable predator. Her delicate inquiry detonates like a kinetic charge. "Excuse me, my Nana has that exact same ink." Silverware clatters, breath hitches, and New York's premier architect of death finds himself momentarily paralyzed. The aroma of fermenting dough permeates the air as old Mr. Constantino, 68 years deep into a life of labor, sanitizes his workstation for the 10,000th time. He hums a hollow tune under the illusion of a quiet evening, unaware that the sanctuary of his shop is about to be breached by a lurking darkness. Enter little Gianna, a 6-year-old soul adorned with chaotic curls and a gaze that pierces through the world's cynicism. She dispenses joy with a reckless abandon, her tattered sneakers and a backpack held together by hope, serving as a testament to her humble reality. Her mother, Amelia, navigates 3 different cycles of labor just to sustain a flickering existence, sacrificing her own sustenance so her daughter can have a simple glass of milk. Gianna's evening meal is nothing more than warm dairy, a harsh reality that exposes the jagged edges of the American dream. Outside, the October winds howl with a mournful intensity, but the atmosphere within shifts violently as the foundation begins to thrum. A low mechanical growl vibrates through the skeletal structure of the building before the first headlights pierce the New York gloom. 3 obsidian SUVs arrive with the predatory grace of an occupying force. Constantino's complexion drains of all vitality as he breathes a single name that carries the weight of an obituary: Valente. In this corner of the world, that name is a command to avert one's eyes and seek divine mercy. You find yourself captivated by your meal, praying the reaper finds a different harvest. 6 lethal silhouettes materialize, clad in bespoke tailoring and exuding a fragrance of high-end cologne and absolute dominance. They bring with them the chill of the outside world and the suffocating pressure of raw authority. A couple remains suspended in a mid-meal tableau, while 72-year-old Miss Peggy white-knuckles her handbag as if it were a life raft. While the room attempts a collective disappearance, Gianna remains unmoved, a small child entirely oblivious to the lethal magnetism radiating from the center of the room. Clutching a crayon, she observes these enforcers with the detached curiosity of a child at a performance. Then, the monolith enters. Nikiko Valente, 36, the elusive specter of his dynasty. He maneuvers with a calculated lethality, his eyes of polished steel mapping every exit and vulnerability. Draped in midnight wool, he takes his seat, and a shifting sleeve reveals the mark, a crowned lion. It serves as a crust of protection for some and a harbinger of the grave for others. With a minimalist gesture of 2 fingers, he requests 6 espressos, his silence more commanding than any shout. While Constantino is gripped by a visible tremor, Gianna finds herself enchanted. She gazes at the gilded feline etched into his skin as if it were a celestial event. Fear has no purchase on her. She views the most dangerous man in the metropolis through a lens of unadulterated wonder. The reason is simple. She recognizes the iconography. It is the same seal that graced the wrist of the woman who provided her nighttime comfort. This small girl, standing in worn footwear, is about to dismantle 18 years of deception and chill the hearts of professional killers. If you appreciate the mechanics of a narrative pivot, observe closely. Gianna abandons her coloring and navigates toward the most feared figure in New York. Prepare yourselves, for we are about to witness the collision of a child's purity and a monster's fractured soul. Gianna descends from her perch, her worn soles moving with ghostly silence. She bypasses a dozen onlookers, screaming a silent warning, drawn toward the very table that even the most daring avoid, guided by a singular, persistent memory. Her miniature footsteps resonate like thunderclaps in the hollow silence of the bistro. Constantino's grip on his towel is so fierce, his knuckles resemble bleached bone, his vocal cords seized by a paralyzing terror. He is a man trapped between the impulse to save and the instinct to survive. He manages a stifled gasp of her name, but she has already reached her destination at Nikiko's elbow. She stares up at this mountain of cold marble and offers a smile devoid of hesitation. Then she delivers the dialogue that reconfigures the entire trajectory of the night. Her voice rings out like a silver chime in a mausoleum. "Hey, mister, my grandma has a tattoo just like yours." The atmospheric pressure seems to vanish. Every seasoned assassin at the table enters a state of suspended animation, as if the concept of time has suddenly expired. The world grinds to a halt. Tommy's hand has already drifted toward his concealed firearm, a primal reaction to any encroachment upon the throne. His pulse thunders in his ears, his entire being coiled in anticipation of the signal to extinguish the threat. Frankie repositions his massive frame, serving as a biological shield for his leader. He scans for the hidden play, struggling to reconcile how a mere child could reference the Valente sigil as if it were common street art. Flatware strikes the floor with a jarring resonance. The enforcers are transformed into stone. 6 apex predators find themselves staring down a single disheveled girl who is standing in the precipice of an abyss, waiting for the word that will dictate her fate. Nico is the final gear to turn. He displays no outward shock, slowly rotating his head with a jawline that suggests a fortress wall. His frozen gray eyes lock onto her with a terrifying surgical precision. Beyond these walls, the rotation of the earth seems to cease. He allows the silence to exert its weight for 3 agonizing seconds. Then he emits a low growl. "What did you just say about your grandmother, child?" Gianna remains unblinking, the only person in the vicinity whose respiration remains rhythmic and calm. She interprets his gravity as a lack of comprehension. With the infinite patience of the innocent, she raises her small arm and indicates her wrist. That is the sacred ground where Grandma Ruthie's ink resided before the passage of years claimed its clarity. My Grandma Ruthie has that same lion, the crown, the blades. She told me it was a token of gratitude from a lifetime ago. She beams with pride, unveiling a forbidden legacy while the ceiling fan continues its indifferent rhythm in the background. Every heart in the room falters. Nico probes her expression for the trace of a scheme, but finds only the terrifying clarity of the truth. He realizes she is not a weapon, but a reflection of his own past. He exhales a heavy, rattling breath that echoes like shifting gravel. He lowers his voice to a whisper that vibrates through the stillness. State her full name. Gianna offers no hesitation. Ruth Ward. The name enters the space like a restless spirit, and the surrounding world enters a deep freeze. The name strikes the table with the force of a sudden storm. Big Sal, a man whose soul has been calloused by 55 years of transgression, stiffens. The frantic tapping of his gold ring on the mahogany reveals a hidden vulnerability in a man paid to be invincible. The sound mirrors a gavel in the quiet air. Ward, Sal murmurs, as if tasting the metallic tang of old history. He turns to Nico and delivers the revelatory blow. Ruth Ward, boss, Atlantic City, 1977. The room becomes a sub-zero vacuum. The men are gripped by a profound cognitive dissonance. They are looking at the living evidence of a ghost. Tommy remains vigilant for the betrayal, unable to process the concept of a miracle. To his cynical mind, every grace is merely a precursor to a knife in the back. "Boss, this is a calculated play," Tommy hisses, his voice dripping with professional paranoia. The child is a pawn. But Nico has already exited the conversation. He is focused entirely on Gianna, his next question delivered with a terrifying, ethereal gentleness. "Where was the placement?" "The left wrist," Gianna clarifies, indicating the spot. Nico offers a slight, somber nod before posing the final question that will determine the resolution of their lives. "Describe it to me perfectly. Every flaw, every detail." Gianna narrows her eyes, excavating the memory from her mind. "A lion with a golden crown," she softly explains. "2 swords beneath it, though hers was much smaller than the one you have." Then her face illuminates as she recalls a specific detail. "Oh, and the lion's front paw is messy. Grandma says the artist's hand slipped because of the boy's arm first, so the boy made him mess up hers to match." The sound of a chair scraping against the floor cuts through the air like a blade. Tommy rises, his hand impacting the table. "There is no way a child could know that," he gasps. The patrons flinch, the kitchen goes silent, and Constantino closes his eyes, wishing for the safety of a dream. The truth has been laid bare for all to see. Nico merely raises a single digit, and Tommy collapses back into his seat like a marionette whose strings have been severed. The silence returns, heavier than before. Nico looks at his own ink, the work of a physician who has been in the ground for 10 years. That doctor carried many secrets to his grave, and the imperfection in the ink was the most sacred among them. Only Nico, the woman he lost to time, and now this child, possessed that knowledge. He can almost feel the phantom sting of the needle once more. Ruth Ward. Nico closes his eyes, and the restaurant dissolves. He is 18 again, his life hemorrhaging onto a frozen floorboards by the Atlantic, watching the light of his own existence dim in the coastal cold. Observe the revelation. Nico recognizes the lineage in her features. One glance confirms his suspicion. This child is the living conduit to a 20-year-old secret that was never meant to resurface. We have reached the point of no return. Big Sal watches as the air becomes dense with significance, realizing they are perched on the razor's edge between a total massacre and a transcendent miracle. Let us revisit 1977. The boss was merely a teenager when he was ambushed by 5 assailants in Atlantic City and left for the crows in the dirt. Nico reveals the lore. A nameless nurse hauled his broken body into a shadow-drenched clinic, barricading the world outside to reclaim his soul from the dark. Her identity was Ruth Ward. In an instant, the assassins ceased their search for a target. The debt of blood has been superseded by an ancient debt of life. The energy of the room undergoes a radical transformation. The killers stand down. Tommy's aggression evaporates, and Vinny displays his open palms. The impending slaughter has been officially rescinded. Polly is visibly shaken. Nico maintains his gaze on the child and delivers the ultimate decree. This girl is to be considered sacred. She is a member of this family now. She has invoked the name of the saint who preserved their lineage. This is no longer a site of potential violence. It has become a theater of spiritual awakening within the walls of a humble diner. Relinquish the grievance. This is a matter of sacred obligation. Peggy's tremors finally subside as the countdown to her demise is halted. The establishment is suspended in a collective breath. In 10 seconds, a potential theater of slaughter has been sanctified into a cathedral of silence. Constantino is adrift in disbelief. Gianna, unaware of her own gravitational pull, has reconvened the city's apex predators after 18 years of icy isolation. The predatory edge has vanished. In Nico's gaze, the cold hunger of the executioner is supplanted by a profound, cathartic reverence for a past long buried. Nico is adrift in the currents of memory. Watching Gianna, he recognizes the karmic architecture of a cycle that has, at long last, found its completion. Though the child is paralyzed by fear, Nico prepares to unearth a Genesis myth. His voice carries the resonant, hollow weight of a long-sealed sepulchre. An absolute, suffocating stillness descends. Every soul in the establishment leans toward the monarch, waiting for the dark fables of the underworld to manifest. At 18, I was already draped in the heavy wool of a dead man, Nico declares. He was a juvenile sovereign in a kingdom designed for his destruction. Note the anatomy of betrayal. A brief excursion to Las Vegas ended when a parasitic informant traded Nico's life for a fleeting handful of silver. 5 silhouettes emerged, eschewing firearms for the intimate cruelty of a slow execution. They desired a visceral finale, leaving Gianna visibly haunted by the imagery. They dismantled him, discarding his remains like industrial waste. Nico's hand drifts to his shoulder, where the phantom agony of 18 years remains localized. As he dragged himself through the mire of his own blood, a singular beacon appeared. Gianna realizes her grandmother was the hand that reached into the dark. Ruthie Ward was a paragon of quiet defiance. Eschewing the authorities, she chose the sanctity of her own hearth, her memory reflected in Nico's silver-gray eyes. Consider the scene. A bloodied scion of crime collapsed upon her floor. While most would summon the state, Ruthie chose the radical act of individual mercy. Operating without a safety net, this solitary nurse reconstructed his shattered form while hunters circled her home, thirsty for his blood. Armed with only gin and needle, Ruthie became a force of nature, yet the inevitable occurred. The demons of his past arrived at her threshold. Tracking the crimson breadcrumbs, the assassins arrived. Ruthie secreted the future patriarch in a cupboard before confronting 5 predators with nothing but her resolve. She met their monstrous gaze with a simple, impenetrable truth. I am a healer. I serve all. This moral clarity served as her legendary cuirass. The deception held. Ruthie provided sanctuary for 4 full rotations of the sun, a tale that sends a rhythmic chill through even Big S. Nico extended the promise of infinite wealth, a kingdom for a life. But Ruthie sought no tribute, a realization that leaves Gianna in awe of her ancestors' fortitude. Consequently, Nico bestowed upon her the ancestral sigil. In the lexicon of his world, that ink renders a person untouchable, an earthly deity beyond the reach of violence. She remains the solitary civilian to wear the house shield. Gianna's tears flow freely as Nico prepares the final, shattering revelation of this narrative. Nico recalls his dawn departure, every movement a symphony of agony, as he stepped through the proverbial flames toward his destiny. Here is the critical shift. At the threshold stood a 9-year-old girl, her backpack a shield, observing him with the stoicism of a veteran. She was the fruit of Ruthie's lineage. In that silent exchange, Nico pledged that should her blood ever require a fortress, he would be its foundation. Gianna's desperation to identify this figure is palpable. Nico averts his gaze as the narrative tension reaches its breaking point. Beyond the swinging doors, a woman labors over dishes. Nico exhales the truth. That girl was your mother. The realization shatters the room's atmosphere. Enter Amelia Ward, a woman etched with the fatigue of the mundane, blissfully unaware that the architecture of organized crime has filled her diner. Perceiving the shadows surrounding her child, her maternal instinct ignites. Though she trembles, her internal structure remains forged from unyielding steel. "She is only 6, Amelia cries, interposing herself between the predators and her offspring. She is a specter of her youth, yet the only one daring to defy these living ghosts. Nico rises. The sovereign at last confronts the princess he swore to guard 18 years ago, completing a long dormant covenant. The girl from the clinic and the fractured woman in the diner are a singular identity. Nico finally gives it voice. "You are the daughter of Ruth Ward." Amelia's reality fractures. She recalls the stains upon the floor and the clandestine patient her mother sheltered for a lifetime. She remembers the bandaged youth who vanished into the light 18 years prior. The cosmic debt has finally matured. She dissects his features, the glacial gaze and the physical asymmetry. The jagged cartography of his shoulder confirms it. "That boy," she murmurs. Nico offers a singular, majestic affirmation. Amelia's composure disintegrates. Her legs fail her. For 27 years, her mother's history was a void, now filled by this formidable presence. She clings to Gianna as her world inverts. Her lips tremor as 3 decades of ambiguity coalesce into a painful clarity. Sensing her frailty, Nico offers a seat, a gesture of respect for the weight she carries. She remains standing. She releases Gianna, allowing the child to exist outside her shadow. Nico begins to speak, his cadence echoing a man navigating a landscape of restless spirits. "I spent years pursuing your mother's trail," he confesses. But Ruth was a ghost by design, vanishing from Las Vegas to reinvent herself in New York. She erased every digital and physical trace of her existence. When Amelia seeks a reason, Nico provides the cold truth. She sought to insulate her child from men like him. A constriction grips Amelia's heart. The mystery of their flight from Vegas, the name changes, the quiet life she had always attributed to a deserting father. Ruth was not escaping a failed marriage, but a dark destiny. She was preserving Amelia from a void she had only briefly witnessed. "I eventually located her," Nico explains. 2 years ago, my search led to a doorstep in the Bronx. He pauses, his expression hardening. But illness had already claimed Ruth months before my arrival. Amelia is paralyzed. The internal dam collapses into silent, persistent tears. It is 2 years of repressed grief finally finding its outlet, a jagged, belated recognition of her mother's true burden. Ruth wasn't merely a weary nurse. She was the woman who pulled an 18-year-old from the abyss, mended him, and defied 5 executioners with a lie that saved his life. Her words carried a weight that stunned even the most monstrous of men. She was the unknowing scion of a legend, a daughter of a titan. Nico's voice arrives like a lingering spirit, recalling a pledge made 18 years ago to protect that bloodline at all costs. Their eyes meet, revealing a chasm of lost time. He speaks of a trail gone cold, of a woman who became a specter through the simple, grinding attrition of poverty. To be poor is to be invisible, a nomad fleeing not a man but an empty bank account. Every rising cost was a signal to retreat, a life constantly uprooted by the winds of misfortune. She was not fleeing a pursuer, she was merely caught in the tide. Nearby, Gianna witnesses the salt-streaked map of sorrow etched onto her mother's face. In a gesture of pure instinct, the child anchors herself to the only world she knows. She clings to the stained apron, an act of desperate gravity, terrified that her mother might simply evaporate into the cruel atmosphere of their existence. The girl's grief finally breaks, a symphony of sobs for a grandmother she never knew and a mother she might lose. Big Saw observes this display of raw humanity, grumbling a low truth to his silent companions at the table. They remember Ruth Ward as a singular force of nature. Frankie offers a grim acknowledgement of her legacy. Tommy, who had viewed the child with a predator's suspicion just 30 minutes prior, now stares at his own hands in contemplation. 6 men of violence. Men who are normally the architects of chaos now sit paralyzed within the confines of a greasy spoon. They are forced to witness the fragility of a broken family, a moment of profound vulnerability that is entirely alien to their predatory world. The manifestation of an ancient moral debt stands before them, shivering in a damp uniform. One wonders how a life saved can ever be truly balanced. Amidst this emotional wreckage, a phone vibrates, a frantic mechanical heartbeat in Amelia's pocket. The persistence of the vibration demands attention, a pulse of modern anxiety against her hip. She finally retreats from her grief to answer. It is the landlady, a woman whose voice is usually reserved for the cold commerce of rent. The voice on the other end is brittle with an unfamiliar terror. The sanctuary has been violated. The door was shattered, the rooms ransacked. The message is clear, debts are being called in, and the building is no longer safe from the fire. Amelia's grip is so tight, it threatens to shatter the plastic. A second notification interrupts. A call from the market that feels like a plunge into sub-zero waters. Angie's voice is a frantic warning of a predator on the scent. The message is chilling. The hunters have a name, an age, and a routine. They are no longer searching for a shadow, they are targeting the child. The phone slips from her grasp, gravity reclaiming the useless piece of technology. The blood retreats from her face, leaving a mask of marble. The threat has evolved from a vague concept into a targeted strike. The monster has breached the perimeter and dismantled the only place they called home. Gianna perceives the shift in her mother's soul instantly. Her voice is a fragile thread as she asks the question every parent fears. Amelia is left speechless, the language of comfort failing her in the face of such absolute peril. She is hollowed out, but Nico has already cataloged the details. In the oppressive quiet of the room, the landlady's panic and the market's warning were as clear as a bell. He has already begun to calculate the response. He rises with the calculated grace of a predator preparing for this hill. His shadow looms large, a dark omen across the linoleum. His gaze is a surgical instrument, diagnosing the threat before him. You have been marked for liquidation. It is a statement of fact, delivered with the eerie stillness of an approaching hurricane. Amelia shields her daughter, her pride still flickering like a dying ember. She attempts to claim the burden as her own, a solitary warrior to the end. She speaks of handling the storm alone, yet her hands betray her. Nico watches the tremor, his voice a low, resonant frequency that vibrates with the power of an avalanche. He sees the cracks in her armor. He dismantles her illusion of control with a few sharp truths. 18 years ago, a debt of life was forged without hesitation. Tonight, he is not asking for permission to intervene. He is fulfilling a blood oath to the dead. The choice is made in the silence between heartbeats. For her daughter, she will accept the protection of monsters. The atmosphere in the diner shifts, becoming heavy with the scent of impending ozone and organized violence. Frankie initiates the logistical dance of war with 2 hushed calls. Tommy is a blur of kinetic energy, inspecting his weapon with a cold, professional intimacy before positioning himself to scan the perimeter for incoming threats. Big Saw moves toward the secondary exit, a living fortification refined by 5 decades of survival. Vinny and Polly exchange a silent shorthand of killers, moving like wraiths to secure the rear of the building. The owner can only watch as his humble establishment is transformed into a reinforced command center in 30 seconds. It is a masterclass in tactical transition where every exit becomes a choke point under the command of 6 professionals. There is no shouting, only the rhythmic precision of a lethal mechanism. In the eye of this man-made hurricane, Amelia realizes she is no longer a solitary target. Outside, 3 black vehicles roar to life like waking beasts. The vibration of the engines hums through the structure, a synchronized growl of a pack ready for the chase. Nico leads them out, his presence an invisible aegis, a shield of dark influence protecting them from the encroaching night. Tiny fingers seek the safety of a mother's palm as they approach the obsidian convoy gleaming under the yellow street lamps. They move as a single unit, Polly taking the point, his eyes scouring the dark for any sign of a rival predator. Nico assumes his position in the center car, the nucleus of the formation. Frankie leads while Tommy and Vinny provide the iron rearguard. They have created a moving fortress of glass and steel to protect their precious cargo. The convoy glides through the neon-drenched arteries of Manhattan, a dark current in a river of light. Within the safety of the cabin, Gianna's fear begins to give way to a childlike fascination with the blur of the city. She leaves a mark of her existence on the window, breathless at the cinematic scale of their escape. Amelia can only hold her tighter, the absurdity of their sudden elevation to high-priority targets leaving her completely mute. Her throat is constricted by the jagged memory of their ruined home. Nico remains a statue of ice, his features illuminated by the spectral blue light of his device as he reviews data with the detached focus of a professional executioner. The time for rhetoric has passed. As they cross the bridge, the silence is broken by the cold, mechanical report from the lead car. A shadow has appeared 3 vehicles back, a van riding their tail with hostile intent. Frankie seeks direction through the rearview mirror. Nico is unmoved, a study in lethal patience. Tommy's voice crackles through radio, vibrating with a hunger for the coming violence, asking for the order to engage. Nico delivers the decree with a chilling finality. He directs the play toward the isolation of Pier 46. The plan is a tactical pincer: cut the exit, block the front, and eliminate the threat with quiet surgical precision. The squad executes the maneuver with the fluidity of a well-oiled machine. One vehicle breaks formation to loop back, while the others herd their pursuers toward the inevitable conclusion of the trap. Gianna feels the sharp tilt of the car as they dive into the shadows of the docks. Within 3 minutes, the van is lured into the darkness. The trap is sprung, the gates are sealed, and the game reaches its violent end. The warehouse walls become a tomb for the unwary. Vinny and Tommy are out before the tires stop spinning, neutralizing the occupants of the van and dragging them into the dust with terrifying efficiency. A search of the targets reveals the tools of the trade: a phone and an envelope of surveillance. They are images of Amelia in her most vulnerable moments, documenting a life of struggle under the gaze of a voyeur. The horror deepens with photos of the child. The silence in the car becomes a physical weight as the evidence is passed to Nico. He stares at the imagery, a storm brewing behind a mask of indifference. Looking at the photos, Amelia feels the visceral chill of being prey. This was not a random encounter, it was a methodical hunt. Nico secures the evidence near his heart, a silent promise of retribution. He speaks into the darkness, his voice reaching a temperature below freezing. To target a ward is to sign a death warrant. Soon, they are rising toward the penthouse, far above the reach of the common predator. The child is overwhelmed by the sheer scale of the luxury. She gazes through the floor-to-ceiling glass at a city that looks like a field of scattered diamonds, a world away from the gutter they left behind. The air inside is thick with the scent of cedar and the warmth of security. It is a fortress disguised as a palace, all marble and amber light. Gianna moves through the space with the frantic energy of a bird released from a cage. She marvels at the opulence, her cries of joy echoing through the vast rooms. Amelia stands in the center of it all, her heart aching as she watches her daughter finally breathe in a world that was never meant for them. Material wealth pales beside the harrowing realization of their deprivation. For a 6-year-old, a stocked refrigerator is a divine intervention. Nico enters last, his quiet commands finalizing the night's dark architecture. As the deadbolts slide home, he sheds his outer layer, bearing the Valente sigil etched across his skin. Surveying his hollow kingdom, he offers Amelia a fragile peace, safety and sustenance finally within reach. He gestures toward the far bedroom, leaving the logistics to Frankie. Amelia, mute with shock, leads Gianna toward a bath where pristine garments await. The child, mesmerized by this sudden luxury, falls into a bewildered sleep. 20 minutes pass before Amelia reemerges to find Gianna etching dreams onto window panes with a worn wax stick. Nearby, Nico speaks into a handset, his voice a low, rhythmic cadence of shadow and consequence. Sensing her presence, he ends the call. The girl rejects sleep, presenting her canvas with a simple declaration. I am drawing you. She reveals a figure in tailored wool, crowned by a fractured ring of light. Is this my likeness? He asks, lingering on the image. When questioned about the halo, the child identifies him as a celestial protector cloaked in ink. He retreats to the window, seeking refuge in the dark. Beneath his calcified expression, a solitary tear fractures against the glass, a brief lapse before the predator resurfaces. Amelia witnesses it all. The city's apex predator, dismantled by a child's primitive sketch. Weighted by empathy, Amelia watches Nico tend to the sleeping girl with the clumsy reverence of a man unaccustomed to softness. He seeks the balcony's chill. She follows, tethered by shared trauma. Amidst the biting air, she demands his motivation. Is this penance for her mother? Nico gazes at the rising river fog, his voice saturated with the crushing gravity of an unpayable debt. At 18, the world branded me a beast, yet your mother recognized only a wounded child. His composure wavers briefly. I have lacked such grace since her light was extinguished. He faces her, his psychological armor dissolved. Until tonight, when your daughter saw me. Amelia's emotional threshold breaks, her tears a reluctant surrender to the profound tragedy of his existence. Allowing her the dignity of grief, he focuses on the urban horizon until his commanding persona returns. I shall neutralize Maddox. Once concluded, your life as a fugitive ends forever. When she refuses his wealth, he clarifies that this is no commercial transaction, but a debt of blood. Passing her, he murmurs that her mother deserved a kinder fate, and she does too. Dawn bathes the sanctuary in light. Gianna remains asleep, her fingers curled around a silver lion, a shimmering fragment of an opulent world she has only begun to navigate. Amelia observes her daughter's rhythmic breathing from the kitchen. This stillness fractures at 7:15 when the elevator announces the arrival of the collective. Frankie, Tommy, and their associates. The men appear ravaged by sleeplessness. Nico sits at the table's zenith, mesmerized by a stagnant espresso. Frankie deposits a mobile device on the wood, his expression heavy with grim revelation. He initiates the playback. A youthful voice, tremulous and deceptive, broadcasts their coordinates, confirming that Valente has taken residence in the penthouse for the night. The response is clinical. Confirmed. Prepare for tomorrow's assault. As silence thickens, Tommy's gaze fixes on a fledgling driver, a 3-month hire who now seeks to vanish into the masonry. Confronted by the echo of his treason, the boy pales, his eyes frantic with the panic of a cornered rodent. Crucially, Nico denies him even the dignity of a glance. Discarding cinematic tropes of theatrical rage, Nico offers only a subtle nod toward his caffeine. Frankie's hand descends like a lead weight onto the boy's shoulder with a hospitable invitation to leave. His tone mimics casual camaraderie, though the boy's composure has utterly liquefied. Once the elevator seals their fate, Nico resumes his discourse, treating the purge as a mere administrative necessity. Maddox is sprinting toward a terminal collision. The strategy transforms the residence into an arachnid's web, an inviting facade of warmth concealing a lethal presence in every crevice. The snare awaits Maddox's arrival, but Gianna must first be extracted. Polly is tasked with her relocation to a secret Staten Island sanctuary. 10 minutes later, she stirs in a state of disoriented waking. Amelia frames the departure as a journey with an uncle, yet Gianna's focus remains singular. She rushes toward Nico, her small feet pounding the floor before whispering his name with reverent desperation. Poised to depart, Nico is arrested by her imploring gaze. This isn't the loyalty of a conscript, but the absolute faith of a child. It is time to hunt the monsters. Her request for a future reunion leaves him catatonic. Having been starved of human affection for 36 years, he stands as a monument of unyielding stone. He offers a touch as tentative as if she were spun from fragile crystal. When the threshold closes, the flat regresses into a sepulchre, the silence possessing a physical weight. Amelia remains rooted, her gaze fixed on the elevator with unshakable resolve. Nico recognizes the frigid determination in her spirit. She is a woman who refuses to retreat. Invoking her mother's refusal to flee, she summons a spectral memory that haunts him. Her defiance causes an ancient ache to tighten within his chest. He remarks on her striking resemblance to the deceased. By 11 p.m., the residence projects an aura of domestic tranquility, a calculated and total fabrication. A solitary bulb illuminates the stove, casting shadows over a pair of small shoes. This curated image of vulnerability serves as the bait for a meticulously rigged ambush. Tommy lies prone behind the upholstery, while Vinny haunts the shadows of the closet. Big S waits in the alley with the predatory patience of a seasoned angler. A quartet of sentries secures the lobby. Nico remains immersed in darkness, tethered to his device, while Amelia prepares her psyche on the floor of the adjacent room. At 11:23, the vermin arrive. Ray Maddox, the sycophant exiled 2 years prior for his treachery, reemerges from the gutters. Maddox arrives with 15 subordinates, deluded by visions of tactical brilliance. In truth, he is steering his men directly into a waiting thresher. The elevator announces their arrival. 5 assailants emerge with raised weapons, misinterpreting the domestic stage, dressing as a sign of total victory. Their incompetence is staggering. 4 paces into the trap, their consciousness is extinguished. Tommy surges from his concealment, shattering their momentum before a single eyelid can flutter. A blinding burst erupts. Big S initiates the sequence, and Vinny manifests as a specter of violence, neutralizing targets before the sound of entry can even register. Shards of glass scatter as the secondary unit encounters Frankie's men. The stairwell becomes a site of efficient slaughter, with bodies descending the concrete like discarded ballast. No ballistics are discharged. Following Nico's strict protocol, the tertiary squad finds themselves entombed in a lightless chamber, encircled by unseen predators. Capitulation is immediate. 7 of the invaders lie prone upon the floor, alive, yet profoundly broken by the evening's events. Tommy sweeps the discarded weaponry aside like refuse. Big S surveys the carnage with a look of weary disappointment at the sheer amateurism of the assault. Frankie appears with bruised hands to declare the operation a success. However, the tally remains incomplete. 15 subordinates are accounted for, but the architect is absent. Maddox has vanished. A surge of frantic realization hits Nico as he races toward Amelia's chamber with the desperation of a man who has failed. The quarters are vacant. Recalling the forgotten service exit, Nico realizes Maddox exploited a secret he should have anticipated, a catastrophic oversight. Unprecedentedly, the patriarch has taken flight. He surges toward the service corridor, a portrait of unadulterated panic fueled by the sudden collapse of his empire. Bathed in the crimson glare of alarm lights, A shriek pierces the air. Then comes that familiar, abrasive rasp, the voice of a serpent. Despite 2 winters passing, Ray's venom remains unchanged. The barrier gives way with a violent kick. There stands Maddox, his cowardice manifest as he uses Amelia as human armor, a barrel pressed firmly against her temple. He is a cornered beast. Her complexion turns a bruised violet as she gasps for oxygen. She had attempted a warning, but her voice was 60 seconds too late. Maddox wears the grotesque, empty grin of the truly fractured. It is the final, pathetic gambit of a failing man. Maddox hauls her into the open, a sick performance for Nico's benefit. Yet Nico approaches with a terrifying, empty-handed composure. Within the skeletal remains of the parlor, the marksmen are poised. Frankie signals for restraint, knowing a single tremor of a trigger finger would extinguish the girl's life. Maddox is unraveling, his voice a frantic scream demanding distance. He is already a ghost, though he hasn't stopped moving. Nico steps into the glow, a figure carved from stone, indifferent to the threat. Nico's gaze slices right through him. 15 of your men are already cold, Ray. Now you're cowering behind a woman. Tell me, how does this story end for you? I walk out of here, or she stops breathing, Maddox bellows. Nico's expression remains fixed. He shifts his focus to Amelia, a silent communication passing between them as her eyes lock onto his. It is a moment of transcendent trust. In her features, he sees the ghost of her mother from 18 years ago. Through the static of the room, she breathes out a single command. Take the shot! Nico catches the cue. He begins a psychological dance to fix Maddox's attention, while Vinny dissolves into the peripheral shadows, closing the distance like a silent specter. One noiseless step at a time. Maddox is consumed by his own arrogance, blind to the periphery. At Nico's subtle nod, Vinny strikes, a surgical, bone-shattering impact to the cervical spine. The weight of the man collapses. The steel clatters to the floor. The curtain falls on Maddox. Tommy is upon him instantly, pinning him down before the air can return to his lungs. Frankie secures the perimeter and the weapon. As Amelia's strength finally fails her, Nico is there, anchoring her before she hits the ground. His grip is an unbreakable promise. She glances upward and witnesses a rare fracture in his mask. A flicker of pure dread. It isn't the presence of the enemy that haunts him, but something far more intimate. He has walked with spirit since his 18th year, but this fear is a new burden. The crushing weight of the what if, the terror of being just 1 second too slow. The refuse is cleared away. Frankie executes a brief, untraceable call. No interrogations are necessary, no unnecessary breath is spent. The work is simply done. The philosophy of the Valente family is absolute. Nico's word is reality. As for Maddox, he has been systematically erased from both history and human recollection. Shattered crystal and ruined architecture surround them. But these are mere trifles. It is only timber and stone. The foundations of their world remain unshaken tonight. Amelia sits amidst the wreckage in a trance-like state. Nico directs Frankie to retrieve the child. The long-awaited reconciliation is finally at hand. 30 minutes pass before the vehicle returns. The door is flung open before the wheels stop spinning. A single cry of, "Mommy!" echoes through the hollow lobby. Amelia collapses to her knees, embracing the child with a fervor that transcends her trauma. Gianna is unharmed. In the calculus of their lives, that is the only metric that matters. The shadows failed to claim a victory this evening. Nico sits in the back of the sedan, a silent titan, while Frankie stands vigil like a gargoyle. Even the most hardened among them recognize the sanctity of the reunion. Finally, Nico breaks the silence, commanding them to move inside. The trajectory has shifted toward a new sanctuary. Amelia watches in a daze as he dictates security protocols and architectural details as if reading a mundane list. This wasn't a reactive impulse. The Don had orchestrated this contingency months ago. This isn't a mere response to a threat. It's the fulfillment of a long-standing providence. Perhaps it was predestined the moment he learned her identity, or the day he stood over her mother's headstone. Amelia is too spent to resist this brand of salvation. A procession of 3 black SUVs departs, resembling a high-stakes funeral motorcade. Polly commands the vanguard, Nico shields the family in the center, and the sweepers bring up the rear. Big S sits in the front, his eyes hunting for threats on the blacktop. They traverse the Manhattan Bridge, where the metropolis below resembles a scatter of diamonds. Gianna's face is pressed to the cold glass, watching the golden lamps transform into long, neon ribbons of light. "Look, Mommy, we're being guarded by real heroes," the girl murmurs, intoxicated by the spectacle. Amelia offers a ghost of a smile. It's a strange irony that to a 6-year-old, this brutal odyssey feels like a fairy tale. But for the man in the front seat, the road is paved with memories. The motorcade enters a tranquil Brooklyn neighborhood, a place of swaying trees and the rhythmic nocturnal hum of insects. The engines rumble against the 4-story brick facade, a sound heavy enough to shake the foundations of the street. Inside the surrounding homes, lights flicker on as the neighbors observe the sudden intrusion from behind their curtains. The local residents are unwitting spectators to this unfolding drama. Doors open in perfect unison. 6 men in tailored suits emerge, their footsteps rhythmic on pavement as they establish a perimeter. Then Amelia steps out, cradling a sleeping Gianna. The child is lost to dreams, her hair a wild halo. Above them, a woman in a dressing gown leans out her window, paralyzed by the sight. She watches the armored fleet and the silent guards as if a movie set has bled into reality. She grips the ledge, a silent question on her lips. The vehicles remain stationary, arranged with a geometric precision that signals both power and absolute permanence. Without warning, the high beams pierce the darkness, illuminating the brickwork like a stage. The couple above is caught in the glare, caught between the instinct to call for help and the awe of the spectacle. The street has become a theater for a play they cannot understand. A child peeks out a door and vanishes instantly. Nico cuts the ignition, finally emerging from the safety of the shadows. He performs a gesture that leaves his seasoned crew speechless. He removes his jacket, folds it with meticulous care, and descends to one knee. The sovereign of this underworld is lowering himself to meet a child's gaze. Gianna stands there, blinking away the fog of sleep. There is no fear in her eyes. Even a child perceives the gravity when a man of his stature humbles himself. She knows the words to come will be sacred. Nico rests a hand on her shoulder, a hand forged for the mechanics of death, but his touch is weightless. "Gianna," he speaks, his voice carrying the texture of velvet. "This is not the executioner, but a man seeking atonement. Look at me." He holds her focus. "From this moment on, if anyone ever dares to trouble ye," he says, the silence stretching tight. "Anyone at all?" A faint, knowing smile touches his lips. "Tell them your grandmother is the one who saved Valente." "That will be more than enough," he murmurs. Gianna's face transforms with joy, and she throws herself into him, clinging to his neck. She holds on with a desperate innocence, and for a moment he simply allows it. Nico sits frozen, his limbs useless. It is a repeat of the penthouse vulnerability, now laid bare for the world. He eventually offers 2 stiff, clinical pats to her back. Tommy bites his lip, struggling to contain his amusement at the boss's discomfort. When she finally pulls away, she is radiant. Nico rises, fastidiously brushing the dust from his knee, and turns his attention to Amelia. From his breast pocket, he retrieves an artifact of another life. It is a fragment of silk, translucent and aged to a pale gold. He places it in her hand. 18 years ago in Vegas, Ruth used this to bind my wounds. I took it when I left. She never suspected a thing. I have carried this for nearly 2 decades, he confesses, looking at the tattered fabric. A constant reminder that a stranger once saved me for no reason at all. He meets her gaze. It belongs to you now. Amelia's hand trembles under the weight of the memory. The phantom scent of a hospital clinic seems to cling to the weave. Then, Nico produces a silver pendant, a lion intricately carved to mirror the ink etched into his very soul. A miniature replica of his own mark, cast in silver, is draped around the child's neck by hands hardened by a lifetime of transgression. His lieutenant retreats, sensing the sanctity of the moment as the patriarch breathes a vow of eternal vigilance. He promises a sentinel's presence, a spectral guardian born from a past obligation. Gianna gazes into the polished surface, unaware that the tears tracking down her mother's face signaled the miraculous survival of a forgotten lineage. These are saline offerings of catharsis, a realization that her mother's quiet courage has finally been vindicated. Within this enclave of shadows, the name of the departed is spoken with reverence, punctuated by a soldier's rare, humble obeisance. The collective, a brotherhood forged in iron, offers a wordless testament of respect under the shroud of 2 a.m. On a nondescript pavement, the air thickens with the weight of an unchoreographed, soul-stirring ritual of loyalty. This silent ceremony marks a definitive conclusion to their exile. They cross the threshold into an interior of mahogany warmth and soft fabrics, a domestic fortress where the concept of safety finally transcends mere theory. The decay of their former life is absent, replaced by a modern sanctuary of pristine surfaces and running warmth. It is the realization of a phantom dream, a space where the basic dignity of comfort is no longer an impossibility. Hygiene and warmth have become their new currency. The child navigates the architecture of her new reality with primal curiosity, transforming porcelain tiles and private corners into her personal theater of discovery. A cry of delight over a simple closet prompts a rare, genuine expression of joy from Amelia. Yet, as she settles into the plush upholstery, the tactile comfort serves as a stark reminder of the carnage that inaugurated this 18-year odyssey. Gianna reclines beside her, mesmerized by the silver iconography of the lion and the blade. What was once dismissed as a dusty relic of an unknown grandmother is now revealed as an ancestral shield. The girl manipulates the metal, her youthful intuition distilling complex histories into simple truths. She declares the emblem's terrors neutralized, prompting her mother to inquire into the source of this sudden, profound psychological shift. Her logic is as elegant as it is pure. The gift was an exchange for a restoration of the spirit. Hearing this, the fractured pieces of Amelia's heart begin to coalesce into a singular, resonant whole. Nearly 2 decades of suffering are reconciled through a solitary act of mercy. Gianna reaches for her pink journal, the final artifact of the woman who unknowingly set this cosmic machinery in motion. Seated upon the floor, the child begins to document this modern myth in crude, sprawling script. With the vibrant strokes of her crayons, she illustrates the salvation of the man who now commands their world. Observation from the sofa reveals a child's interpretation of power. Gianna presents a sketch of a broad-shouldered figure in tailored attire, his features softened by a benevolence that mirrors the syndicate's master. A pair of golden wings towers over the charcoal figure, branding him a savior without a cape. Amelia's eyes glisten as she acknowledges the profound truth in her daughter's simplistic canonization of the man. The child is soon enveloped in the opulence of high-thread count cotton. Amelia presides over this nightly ritual, ensuring that the perimeter of her daughter's psyche is fortified against the dark. The silver pendant catches the ambient light. Gianna admits into the silence that the encroaching shadows have lost their predatory edge, a confession met with a tender, rhythmic caress from her mother. She attributes this newfound peace to the knowledge of an unseen protector. Amelia bestows a kiss upon her brow, desperately trying to preserve this fleeting moment of serenity before it dissolves into the past. As the room descends into darkness, a solitary lunar beam illuminates the silver predator clutched tightly in the child's palm. Sleep finally claims the girl, while the winds of New Jersey buffet the glass, unable to penetrate this new, impenetrable sanctuary of the shadows. The urban hum is punctuated by the guttural roar of a high-performance engine. No mere commuter, but a shark circling the waters to ensure the safety of its prize. In her slumber, the child offers a subconscious farewell to the kingpin. Amelia remains a silent witness to her daughter's unprecedented state of repose. She waits for the child to enter deep sleep, her own body aching with the residue of a grueling shift and the lingering scent of industrial kitchens. Contemplating the silver insignia upon her wrist, the labyrinthine mysteries of her mother's history finally begin to align within the quiet of the room. For the first time, the crushing weight of insolvency and menial labor evaporates, replaced by a smile that feels lighter than breath itself. A profound tranquility settles over the space, only to be interrupted by the sudden, luminous glow of a smartphone screen in the darkness. An anonymous dispatch delivers a 5-word directive to secure the entrance and find peace, signed only with a singular, weighted initial. She transmits a quiet reciprocation before engaging the heavy iron bolts, finally surrendering to the rhythmic, safe cadence of her daughter's respiration. 18 years of chaos have finally found their resolution. As the Jersey girl sleeps, her benefactor maintains his silent vigil from the confines of a darkened sedan. The habitual frost in his gaze briefly thaws, revealing the irony of the apex predator, assuming the role of the devoted sentinel. Ruth was more than a healer. She was the architect of a kingpin's survival, a debt now being settled through an invisible, bulletproof canopy. Obligations in this world do not expire, they merely wait. The mercy extended to a broken boy 18 years ago has matured into an impenetrable fortress for his heirs. It is a profound irony that a singular, forgotten act of humanity becomes the primary armor against a cruel world nearly 2 decades later. Within the subculture of the underworld, a debt of honor is immortal, capable of fundamentally altering the trajectory of an entire family bloodline. Every lineage possesses a singular moment of grace that echoes through time. May your own circles remain secure beneath the watch of the stars tonight. Allow this odyssey of vengeance and mercy to finally find its rest.